Over the last modules, we had a detailed look at the core basics that you have to know when you're working with CSS. Now I want to practice these basics together with you. We'll start together, though you'll always get a chance to pause the video and try something on your own. And then I got a bigger building block, an entire new page which we add to our project, which I want you to fill on your own. But no worries, you can do it, you'll learn everything you need for that, and as I said, we'll start together. So let's dive right into this module then. So this is the page as we left it, and as I said, we'll work on this image a bit more in future modules. For now, I want to continue working on this page, on the content on this page to be precise. For example, our plans. This section clearly isn't finished. We want to show a variety of plans the user may choose from here, and the styling can be improved too. For example, this could be centered, but we also need more content obviously. Then below that we'll add yet another section and then a footer, but let's get there step by step and let's start with these plans now. For that, attached to this video you will find an HTML file with some additional content which we add to our page. We add it here in the section with the ID plans. And I want to replace this paragraph here with the content of the file you find attached to this video, this HTML content. Here we describe the different plans we got in our fictional store, in our fictional hosting service. Each plan is simply an article element here with some information like the name of the plan, the price, a short subtitle if you want to call it like this, and a list of the features you get with the plan. So that is setup, some code, which you might actually see if that were a real hosting website. If we save that and reload the page, this is what it looks like. Now actually, as always, this is a working site. Well, except for the buttons, they don't do anything yet. But of course it's working. That is not everything we want to have. We want it to look good too. And the look only is okay. A user could probably work with that, but we can certainly do way better. In the end, what I want this section to look like is this. Now getting there is actually less difficult than it might look like when you first see the end result. So let's start working on that. And of course, the place to start working is in our main.css file, where we want to write some code, some styles for this newly added content. In there, if we scroll up a little bit, so above this whole header part, we will actually see that section title, which we already defined, and that section title is the first thing we use in the plan section here. We had this here before, we just added the part below it. So the part below is where we will continue working. And the idea, of course, is to style each plan in the same way. And as you saw in the preview, the middle plan, the recommended one, should be highlighted so that we kind of push the user towards picking this one. So for that, it makes sense to give each plan, so each article here, the same class, I guess. The class, of course, can be named in whichever way you want, and I will just name it plan because, well, it is a plan on my page here. You could, of course, also name it product or anything like that. So I add this plan class to all three articles, and with that added, we can style it. Now, I will add these styles above my header styles, but below the product overview style. And there, I'll simply add the plan class selector, and with that selector, we now can, well, get started giving this plan a nice look. And I will start by, first of all, giving it a background color. You can, of course, pick any color you want. I'll take a light green to fit the look of the rest of our page. And for that light green, I picked the following hex code, D5FFDC. So this is a nice green tone we can use. I also want to align all the text inside of a plan in the center. And we can do that with the text align center property declaration, where we simply, well, define all inline elements and therefore all text that's inside of this box in the center, in the middle. Then we could add some padding to have some distance between the edges of our box and the content of it. And here I'll define 16 pixels as a padding, excuse me. But I also want to add some margin. To be precise, I want to add some margin to the top and bottom so that our plans have a little bit more room to the section title above them and to any content that comes below them. Maybe 8 pixels is a good value here. And finally, I want to have all my free plans sit in the same row. So what we need to do is we need to set display to inline block. As you learned, this turns them into, well, inline block elements, hence they now can fit into the same row. But for this to work, we also need to adjust their width. And actually, we don't need to adjust their width. They would take as much width as their content requires, but that would probably be too much for most screens. So I want to limit their width to 30% of the surrounding container, which in our case, if we inspect our code, simply is this div, where it will also take the full available space. That will mean it takes the full space given to it by this section with the ID plans. Well, that section, we never defined a style for it, so it also takes the full available width, as does the main section. So all the way down to our plan, a plan by default would take the full available width. The surrounding div does so. So if we give the plan article a width of 30%, it will essentially get 30% of the page width, since we never restrict that on any higher level element. So 30% on the plan should make sure that we fit the free plans in one row. And by the way, for smaller screens, this will of course look very ugly. It is something we'll fix in the responsive design section, where we will dive deeply into how you can adjust your layout for smaller screens. But for now, this should do the trick. Now, one other thing I want to do here is I want to set the vertical align to middle to ensure that all free plans are vertically aligned, well, in the middle, so that the middle is the same for all of them. Now, if we save that and we go back to our page, we can reload it, and this already looks quite nice. We got the free plans in one row. Now, the middle one is a bit bigger because it has this extra recommended badge, and it should be bigger because it is the recommended plan, so this actually should stand out. We'll also change its background color. And if we change the page size, then we see the plans scale with it. On small devices, this looks ugly, and eventually we need to add a line break because the content of the plan just is broader than the width we designed or we set up. And on very big screens, on the other end, our plans get stretched out. But these are things we will work on later once we learn how to, well, add a responsive design and control the maximum widths of elements, for example. So that is something we'll fix. But for now, this is already a nice look. Of course, we're not done though. The plans need to be styled differently. These list items need to look differently. The button needs to look differently. And as I said, the middle plan, the recommended one, also should look different than the other two plans. It should stand out. Now, these are all things we'll work on. One other thing I also want to do is I want to center this choose your plan text. And if you already know how to do that, here's your chance. Quickly do that. It's only one property you need to add. The one property you need to add is simply the text align one. So text align will ensure that all the inline content of the section title element, which is a H1 element, so therefore simply the text inside of it, that this inline content will be centered in its line and therefore will be centered horizontally. So if we now reload, this looks better. That's a great first step. Now, in the next lectures, I want to continue working on this. I want to make sure that our plans really look nice and that the middle plan really stands out from the rest. So let's continue working on our plans. We got a first nice look. Now I want to ensure that the plan in the middle really looks different. For this, I want to change its background color. I also want to highlight this recommended badge, so to say. And with that, we would have a layout, a look that would probably push the customer more into picking this plan, which is something you typically want to implement on your pages. So for that, we first of all need to go back to the HTML code. Because to control, for example, this recommended badge, I need to give it an extra class, of course. So you could add any class you want to the H1 tag holding the recommended text. I will add a class which I'll name plan__annotation. Again, following this naming convention where this belongs to the plan, hence it starts with plan, but then it's like a sub-element of the plan. It's the, well, annotation, or you can name it subtitle, you can name it badge, whatever you want. So this is the first thing I want to add. The second thing is I want to add a second class to the article element itself. This second class should allow me to change the background color, to highlight this plan. So I will add plan-highlighted here. This is a helper class which I can use to still get the default plan styles, which I want. I want to get that inline block style, I want to get that vertical align style, but I actually want to override the background color, and I can do that with the help of the plan highlighted class. So let's pick that plan highlighted class here, and let's use it. In the main.css file, I will add it below my plan class here, so plan-highlighted, and I simply want to set the background color to a darker green here. Now the green I picked is 19B8-4C, but of course you can pick any color you want. And with that, if we now save both files, so the index.html and the main.css file, and we reload, the middle plan already stands out more. Now, this looks nice. One other thing we can do though is we could try changing the text color. So set the color to white, for example. If we set it to white, now, in my opinion, the text is a bit easier to read. So I want to keep that look too. The next thing that I want to do, or that I want to add, is I want to add a little drop shadow behind the plan. Now for that, we can use the box shadow property. So on the plan highlighted class, I'll add box minus shadow, and the box shadow property is something we didn't dive in yet. The box shadow property allows you to define a drop shadow or an inset shadow by adding inset as the first keyword, and then adding the same parameters as I'm going to show you. But here I will not add an inner shadow, so I will remove that. And then the other values, which you would also add for an inset shadow then, are the positioning of the shadow on the x-axis. So here I will pick 2 pixels. On the y-axis, I will also pick 2 pixels here. So it's positioned 2 pixels to the right and to the bottom of the original shape. Then you can define the blurriness. Here I will pick 2 pixels too. And the spread. So how much the shadow should actually spread beyond the borders you define with the first 2 values. And here we'll use 2 pixels too. You can omit the spread, and you can also omit the blur, by the way. Then you would get a very sharp shadow which directly ends after the 2 pixels. Or you add all 4 things, of course. And then you add the shadow color. You can use any color here, like green, but I want to use a transparent black. And for that, here's a second new thing, a color function. We thus far always define colors with either a word, like red, or a hashtag. Now actually, there are more ways of defining colors than that, and color functions are one other way. For example, you can use the RGB function to define a color by setting its red, green, and blue value, which is a value between 0 and 255. So for example, this would essentially yield white. And in my IDE, you can even see a preview, even pick a different color if you want. So this is the RGB way of defining a color. Black, on the other hand, would be 000. And there's an alternative to RGB. There is RGBA. RGBA also allows you to add a 4th argument, the alpha channel, which defines the transparency of this color. And here I will set this to 0.5, which means it has a transparency of 50%. If you add 1 here, this will mean it's fully opaque actually, so it's not transparent. If you use 0 here, it's fully transparent. And you can always confirm this in the IDE that you're using or in the developer tools of your browser. There you can also go to the color picker, and here you would see the transparency level 2. Now I will set this to 0.5. So this is a box shadow and a color function, so 2 new things in one step. Awesome. And with that, we can save that and reload the page. And now we see we got that box with this slight drop shadow to the bottom and to the right, which has a light blurriness and a little bit of spread, so a little bit of rough edges, so to say, spreading out a little bit beyond the 2 pixels we defined. And as you can probably also tell, it's not fully black. It's transparent. It looks gray, but it's actually transparent. And for this, I like the look. This really makes this item in the middle stand out. We'll continue working on the look of this layout throughout the course, but for now, this looks good to me. Now, let's continue working on this, and let's next add a better look for this badge here. So we added a drop shadow in the last lecture. Now I want to work on that recommended badge. Keep in mind, in the index.html file, we added that plan annotation class to it. So we can use that, and we can use it by simply using it with the class selector here to assign a style. And the style I want to add to that is, I want to make sure that this actually sits in a white box and therefore has non-white text. And it also should have a tiny drop shadow. Now again, this is a great practice for you. Assign a white background, some green text. Make sure that maybe you add some padding to it, so just that it looks good, and add a drop shadow. You learned how to use it in the last lecture. Here's your chance to pause the video, come up with a style you like, and then I will show you my approach, my solution. So, were you successful? Let's try that together. I'll first of all start with the background, and I'll set it to white, to a solid white color. And of course, you could also use a hex code or an RGB function here. Then I'll assign a text color, and there I want to use that green color, which we also used to highlight our box. So it's the same green as we used as a background color for the highlighted box. Then I will next also add my padding, maybe 8 pixels to all directions to have a little bit more room, more space in that box. Then let's also add a box shadow. And I will just copy the one from up there. I like its look. Let's add it like this, save it, and reload. And that's our recommended badge here on our element. Looks nice in my opinion. Now one thing I will do, and which is of course totally optional, I want to round the corners, and that can be achieved with border-radius. Border radius is simply used by either assigning a different value for each of its sides. So just like margin, you start at the top left, actually top left corner, then top right corner, bottom right, and bottom left. So it goes in the clockwise direction around the box. Or if you want to use the same radius for all corners, you simply set one value. And here I will set all my corners to have a radius of 8 pixels. I don't want to do that on the plan highlighted though, but on the plan annotation. So with that, if I now reload, we see we have this rounded corner here around the recommended badge. Now, this is looking nice in my opinion, so I will leave it like this. The next thing I want to work on are these bullet points. So I want to have my features listed here, but I don't want to have the bullet points. This is something you can also try on your own. Try selecting this list and try working on these bullet points to ensure they look the way you want them to look like. So let's work on these bullet points together now. For that, I'll again go back to my HTML file, and there on the unordered list for each plan now, not just for the highlighted one, I'll add a class to the, unordered list and call it plan__ features. Of course, that name, as always, is totally up to you. Now I will grab that class attribute and add it to all unordered lists so that we style them all and not just one of them. And then I'll go back to the main.css file, and in there I'll add my plan__ features class selector. And now the idea here is to simply set the list style to none. You saw this earlier in the course. List style none removes the bullet points. Additionally, I want to get rid of all the margin and padding introduced by the unordered list. And with that, if we save this and we reload, this looks much nicer in my opinion. We can still clearly see that these are different features, but now they don't look like a boring, well, bullet point list. One thing I want to do though is I want to have a little bit more space between the items. Top and bottom, I mean, not left and right, that's fine, but they should have some space to the items sitting below them. Well, this can be achieved by simply going to the plan feature, so each list item, and changing the margin of it. Now, you could, of course, simply say plan features li to select a list item in the plan features class and set a margin of, let's say, 8 pixels top and bottom and 0 left and right. And if you save that, we got the desired style. Looks good to me. An alternative, which I will use, is that you assign a class to each of these list items to basically stay in line with the rest of your code where you also use a lot of classes. We could name this plan __ feature, and of course this class assignment should now be added to every single list item. Again, this is kind of optional. You can of course use the combinator I just showed you. Using a class probably is a bit cleaner or more in line with your other code, but ultimately it's up to you. If you do use a class though, you simply set it to plan feature like this, of course, just using the plan feature class selector. Once you save that and save the HTML file too, you can again reload the page and see the same look as before. So this is the list styled differently. Now the button is another thing we have to work on, and I also want to change the style of my title and my price. So these are the things coming up in the next lecture. So let's work on the title and the price of these elements. And for that, I'll add more classes to my HTML code. For the title, so free, plus, and premium, I'll add a class of plan __ title. And for the price, unsurprisingly, I add plan __ price. Now, of course, these classes have to be added to all plans. So the title to all the titles, and the price, obviously, to all the prices we got here and for the last plan. With that added, we can again jump back to the main.css file and add some styling. And I will add it above the plan features class selector simply because in HTML, the title and the price come prior to the features. So now with that, here we can add the plan __ title selector and set, let's say, the color of the text to a darker green. Maybe the same dark green we used before on our page. If we now save this, this looks a bit more like value in my opinion. So I like the look of that. Now the price, that's also something we can change or where we might want to change the style. I will add a plan __ price selector here and set it to maybe a grayish color. So maybe let's start with, with color this gray. Maybe it's not dark enough, so let's pick a different one. Maybe go there. And by the way, if you're using Visual Studio Code, you can click on that RGB function to also get the hex code version of that if you want. Of course, it doesn't really matter. You can use either of the two. We then reload. That looks nice, but not in the highlighted plan. In the highlighted plan, this price especially, it's not looking that great. So let's go back and let's change the style for the highlighted plan price. So for the plan highlighted, plan price, now I'm using a combinator to target only the plan price classes in a element which has the plan highlighted class. There, maybe the better color for the price also is that dark green. Now, since this is also the same color we used for the title, we could also change the title. So I will again use plan highlighted, but now together with the title, and change the color of the title maybe to just white. So with these two changed styles for plan, title, and price in highlighted plans, if we reload, this looks better in my opinion. This really leads to a better style of our plan. With these things added, I'm liking the general look. The buttons are things we can still work on. And you also maybe notice that whilst everything is aligned in the middle, the left and the right plan don't have an equal height, which makes sense because the left plan actually has a line break for this text here, whereas the right one doesn't. Now, with the current tool set, it's not that easy to achieve that they all have the same height. We could set the height property. The problem just is that on bigger devices, where this fits into one line, we'll have a lot of empty space in this box thereafter, since, well, the height is set to a fixed height, but the content height changes depending on how many line breaks we need. We'll later in the course learn about Flexbox, a tool which makes that much easier, which allows us to really position the elements in a way that their height is equal and still looks good when it comes to their content, that their content is centered vertically then, and that you overall can style this in a more appealing way. So for now, this is what we'll work with, but be aware that we will change this throughout the course. We're not stuck with this result. So with that, let's move on and let's work on the button in the next lecture. Let's work on that action button you find at the bottom of each box. Right now it's a regular button with the default styles assigned to it by the browser. I want to change that. And for that we could of course use the button selector, but we might have multiple buttons on the page and maybe we don't want to use the same style for all buttons necessarily. So what I'll do is I'll add a class, but I'll just call that class button. This allows me to still set up a generic button class or button style, which I can easily attach to any button I have. But if I ever have another button on the page, which I want to have a different style, I just don't need to attach it, and we don't have to worry about possibly getting into conflicts where we then need to override properties just because we want to go back to the defaults or anything like that. So I'll grab that button class assignment and add it to all the three buttons. And now with that, we can go back to the style sheet and work on the buttons. I'll add the button styles at the bottom of our plan section. And as I said, I will set up a generic button style for that button class. So let's use the button selector. And let's start by adding a background color. Here I want to use the dark green for all the buttons on the page. I also want to give them a white text like this. If we now save this and we go back and reload, we can see that, but we also see that the button has some strange differences. Let's inspect it in the developer tools. There we can see our button style is applied, of course. But if we scroll down, we see there are a couple of default styles set up, like a border, which is by default added, some default padding, and if we go down a bit further, we also see that there are a lot of other defaults when it comes to the text of the button. That's why the font here and the text in general doesn't really look like the text on the rest of our page. Maybe that's the style you want, but I don't want it here. It does, of course, inherit the font family from our body, but as you can see, this is actually overwritten because inheritance is always overwritten by direct style assignments. And the direct style assignment we're getting is the font assigned here, the font assigned by the browser. So this is something I want to change. And for that, what we can do is we can add the font property, and we could set the font family, but then we would keep the other overwritten font values. So I will target the overall font property, which is also just a shorthand for setting a couple of text properties in one step. And I will set it to inherit. Do you remember inherit? Inherit was a keyword, a value, which forces the inherited styles to be applied. So instead of using the browser defaults, it now will actually prioritize inheritance though technically that's not what happens. It just looks at what it would have inherited and directly assigns these styles, so that we actually use the font family and the other font defaults we have on our page and we set up in our body. So with that, if we save this and we now reload, you see the button changed. It increased in size because the text size was also overwritten by the browser defaults. And now it looks more like the rest of our content, which I personally prefer. Now I also want to get rid of that border. So for that button, I'll also assign the border with the shorthand property. Set a 2 pixel or maybe a 1 pixel border here, or 1.5, maybe 1.5 pixels. Solid, and then also of that dark green. So we could also set it to none since you won't see it. The background has the same color. And I also want to override the default padding and set it to 8 pixels in all directions. Now finally, that's of course up to you, I want to add rounded corners. Of course, as always, feel free to pause the video and do it on your own. We can use border radius for that, and I will set it to 8 pixels too. Now if we save that and we reload the page, now the button looks more like the way I want it to look. One thing you'll notice though is that if you hover over it, you get no indication that it's a button. You don't get that hand cursor, and you also get no different hover style. So these are further things I want to add. I also want to change one thing about the text. I want to set the font weight to bold. But now for that cursor. I want to set the cursor, and you can set it with the cursor property, to pointer. The default is default. That's the normal cursor icon. But with pointer, you get that hand icon whenever your cursor is over the button, is hovering over the button. So now you see the cursor changes here. And the cursor property has more than default and pointer. You can, of course, as for all the properties, always see this on MDN or in your IDE if it supports that, auto-completion like mine does. Common values are default and pointer though. So with that, you can of course apply this to any element, not just buttons or links. You can add it to any element. You can indicate to the user that something is clickable. Now, the hover effect was another thing that was missing. So let's add a hover effect. Do you remember how that works? Yeah, you use the hover pseudo class, and let's also add the active pseudo class to change the style when we're holding the mouse pressed down. And there I want to set the background color to white and now the text color to the dark green. So I will reverse the styles. With that, if we reload and hover over the button, that looks much more clickable now. Now, one final thing I want to do, the button doesn't do anything right now. That will change over this course. But I don't like this blue outline we have here. So let's get rid of that in the next lecture, and let's also understand what an outline actually is. So when we click on a button, we get this blue outline, another browser default. You can inspect it in the developer tools by selecting the button and then clicking on this pseudo selector HUV thing here. If you click on it, you can toggle different states, because otherwise it's not really possible to inspect the active state, for example. Here you can check active, and now you see what the button will look like if it's active. You can also see this is the style we assigned for it, but this does not have the blue color. For that, you need the focus pseudo selector. The focus pseudo selector is available for input fields, so both text input fields as well as buttons, which also handle user input. And it basically is applied or becomes active whenever the user has this focused, which of course is the case if the user clicks it, but also if the user circles around with tab. So there you can also set the focus state. So focus has this outline property, as you can see here. Now the outline is comparable to a border, but it's not part of the box model. Keep in mind, the border is part of the box model. The outline actually is not. The outline is just some additional border-like thing, which actually is also applied outside of the box, so before the margin, but after the border. and it's therefore like a lighter version of the border. You can style it with the outline property. Now, as you learned, we need to use the focus pseudo selector for that. And we can simply set outline to none here, because I don't want to have any look for when this button is focused. Of course, you can set a different style. You can set outline to a different look, or assign a normal border, or change any other property. You can, of course, do that for the focus pseudo selector, just as for any other pseudo selector. With that, now if we reload and click that button, we don't have that blue outline, and that is a look I like much more. So our page is clearly taking shape. I like the look of it already. Now I want to add a new section to it. I want to add another section on this product landing page, which we're essentially creating here, where we present the core features of our hosting service to the user. For this, I want to have a clear and strong background color, and I want to have some key figures which we present to the customer. For that, attached to this video, you find another HTML file which holds the code for the next section we add below the other section, so below the planned section, but before we close the main part. And this section here has another section title, and then has an unordered list with a couple of list items, where each has an empty div, so we can add something there, and where each has some, well, advertising text, some key figure, whatever. Now, this is the next section we'll work on. If we save that with that code added, and we reload the page, we'd of course only see the unstyled version of it. Now, the idea is to turn it into this. So let's work on this together. So with the new code added, the first thing I want to do is I want to turn this text here into a text which looks exactly like choose your plan. Now you know how to do that, don't you? So definitely try it on your own. Here's your chance to pause the video, and then we'll do that together. So, were you successful? In the end, we got everything prepared already. If we scroll up to our plans section here, we see that there we have that section title class on the first H1 element. So we can just copy that class assignment and add it to this H1 tag too. That's the power of classes, we can reuse them. If we now reload the page, we get the same look as for the other section title for this one too. Now the plan is to turn this boring bullet point list into a way more appealing layout. And for that, I first of all want to have a strong background color for my section here. So to achieve that, what we can do is we can assign an ID to that section. That ID could now be any ID of your choice. I will name it key-features because I'm highlighting the key features of the app here. We can now use that selector in our CSS file, below the button here maybe. Use it with a hashtag because it's an ID, so we need the ID selector. And there, I'll assign a background color, which is this reddish color we used before, a strong red color. If we save that and reload, now we got this look. The green probably doesn't fit as well anymore, so we need to change that color a bit. And for that, let's now use that hashtag selector again, key features, and let's target the section title class with that descendant combinator. You could also use the direct child combinator as a side note because the element with the section class is a direct child, but I'll use the descendant here, and I'll set the color to white then. I also will add a little bit more margin here, maybe 32 pixels. And I want to add a little bit more margin to the top to my key features here. So margin top could be something like maybe 80 pixels. So really a lot of space to the plan section above it. And some internal padding, maybe 16 pixels. If we save that and we reload, we get a very different look. And I like that look. We have more space to the plans, which looks nice in my opinion. And then we also have more space to the section title, which also emphasizes the strong color here and really draws the attention towards this once you reach that point of the page. Now, one thing I, of course, still need to change are these list items here. They're looking super boring and bad. So let's work on that list in the next lecture and already go ahead and try it on your own. Try turning this boring list into a list where these elements actually sit next to each other rather than below each other, and where maybe you already pimped the text a little bit. Make it white, bold, anything like that. We'll then apply some styles together in the next lecture. So did you find some nice styles? Let's work on these bullet points together. And for that, I'll start in the HTML of the code and first of all assign some classes. I'll start with the unordered list element, and there I'll assign a class which I'll name key-feature__list. Of course, you can pick any class name you want. Now the individual list item will also receive a class, and this actually is my individual key feature. So this will just be a key feature because this is, well, just one key feature element. You could name it key feature element, but in my opinion, key feature already is a fitting name for the element itself. Now in there, I will also assign a class to the text, and it will give it a class of key-feature__description. Now with that, we have to apply these classes to the other key features too. So the key feature class to the other list items and the key feature description class to the other paragraphs in my key features. So with that, the classes are added. Now it's time to work on the styles. For this, I will add a style for the list. Key-feature__list was the class we applied to that. So that's the unordered list element. And I want to remove the list style, so that it's set it to none, and add a margin of 0 and a padding of 0. Next, the key feature itself, key-feature. Here, I now want to set display to inline block again to make sure that all key features are in one line. And I'll give it a width of 30%. And by the way, why not 33? Because of that inline block bug, not really a bug, but of that behavior where white space in between also gets a width, and therefore 33% would actually not fill the entire width, but a little bit more, and hence you would have an ugly line break. With 30% we should be safe. Now with that, if we save that and reload, the elements are sitting next to each other. They're not centered at all though, so that probably is something we want to change too. And we can change it on the list. Since the key features are inline elements, we can target them with text align center, because that centers text, that centers inline elements to be precise. And therefore, if we now reload, it's nicely centered, it's looking good. Now, of course, one other thing I want to do is I want to change the text from a visual perspective too. So my key feature is styled like this. The key feature description should get a special style too. So that's the text itself, the description. Here, I want to also center the text inside of its box to make sure everything is perfectly centered. And I will assign a font weight of bold as well as a white color. And finally, why don't we increase the font size a little bit, maybe to 20 pixels. If we do that and we reload, it's looking good. What we can see is that here we got a little line break issue. That goes away if we increase the page width, of course. For now, it's something we'll simply live with, because on smaller screens we'll have it anyways. We will take care about this later in the course too, and we'll make sure that everything is positioned nicely. Well, one thing we can already do is we can go back and assign a different style for key feature. We can set vertical align to top here. This should ensure that all the key feature texts are aligned at the top, which in my opinion looks a bit better than if the line break is somewhere in the middle. So with that, we got nice key features, but an image above each feature would be nice. Now we'll add images in the backgrounds and images section, For now, let's already prepare a container for the image. Let's add a circle above each text, which for now simply has a background color. Now, to add such a circle, we got that div. It's not there by accident. We can add a class to that div, and I will name this key-feature__image, because eventually this will hold an image. Let's assign that class to all the divs and all the key features. And then in the CSS code here, I'll add a style for it above my description, because in HTML it comes above that, key_feature__image. And now, as I said, the image will follow. For now, what I'll do is I'll assign a background, maybe a light reddish color. We can use FFCEDE here, CEDE, so like rose color. I'll add a width here, let's say of 128 pixels. I'll also give it a border of, let's say, 2 pixels, solid, and a dark gray, maybe 424242. And now, to turn this into a circle, we have to set a border radius, of course, to turn the edges to rounded corners. And to get a perfect circle, you actually have to use 50% here. This will round everything such that you exactly get a perfect circle in the end. If we save that and we reload, we got that here. The problem now is we got no height on that image, so we need to add height to it too. The height, to get a perfect circle, has to match the width, so that you have a square and then you round the corners. So we add 128 pixels as a height. Now we got a circle. And now I want to center that circle horizontally. There's a nice trick you can use with the margin property. You can set margin to left and right, but how do you know how much margin you need to set to center this? Well, you can just set margin auto or 0 auto, because it only matters to left and right, but doesn't hurt if you set it into all directions. And auto will automatically fill the available space to the left and right equally to center the element horizontally. Not vertically, that does not work, but horizontally works. So margin auto will now center that circle. And eventually we'll add an image to that circle, as I said. And now with that, we got our key feature area in a good shape. Images are missing, but will be added. I like the look of that a lot. I think we're building a nice starting page for our hosting service. The next thing we'll add is a footer at the bottom. So let's do that in the next lecture. Our page is taking shape. Let's now add a footer. We got a header and a navigation bar. We also want a footer. For that, you will again find an HTML file attached to this video, which contains the code we have to add. We add it below the main section, but before we close the body. And this simply adds the footer element with a navigation inside of it that holds an unordered list of the links. The links lead nowhere, but hey, it's only there to build a nice UI. So we got our footer. Now the goal is to style it. And if we have a look at our header, we assigned main header as a class. Therefore, to this footer, I will assign main footer. Because for the same reason as with the header, we could use a footer in other places of our app too. So directly targeting the footer is something that would work in this app, but might not work in other apps. And we're always safe if we add such a class, because if we ever add another footer element anywhere on our page, we will not use any code we wrote previously, which we then have to refactor. We simply write code that will not break the future right from the start. So I added that main footer class, and with that in the main.css file, we can start styling. I'll now add this below the main header, because it's like a general style which we will share across pages eventually, and below the header because it's at the bottom of the page. And I will target that main footer class with that class selector. Now let's first of all save both files and reload. This is what the footer looks like right now. We can work on that. And to work on that, I'll start by adding a background color. I'll set it to black and a text color of white If we do that and reload, we get the black background. We got some space around it, so some margin by a child element probably. We can confirm this by inspecting that, and we see the unordered list has a top and bottom margin, which due to margin collapsing is merged with the parent element margin because it's the first and last, or the only child in this case. And therefore, we need to work on that margin. We need to work on that list in general. And the white color isn't applied, well, because, keep in mind, the white color is set on that footer here. The text lives in our anchor tags, though. If we inspect these, well, they inherit this setup, of course. But as you learned many times before, inheritance is overwritten by directly assigned styles. And there is a directly assigned style, this color, the browser default, which is in turn then the blue color. So this is something we have to override explicitly. So setting it here on the main footer element actually doesn't do anything. Well, what we can do here though is we can add some padding, maybe 32 pixels, and some space to the top, maybe margin top of, let's say, 48 pixels. And if you're wondering how I come up with these values, I basically always or often take multiples of the default font size of the browser, which is 16 pixels. But again, you will learn more about that in the dimensions and units module of this course, where we will dive deeper into the different values you can assign. That's just a side note here. So margin top, 48 pixels on the main footer. Now I want to select the unordered list in the main footer. And for that, we of course can assign classes there. We could also use combinators, of course. And for a practice that might be worth doing it, I'll add some classes here though. I'll name this one here main footer links. And then my list item here gets a class main footer link. The actual link is the anchor tag, but the list item holds that. So basically, it constructs the link, you could say. And now back to main.css, I'll add main footer links, which targets the unordered list, to set the list style to none, and the margin to 0, the padding to 0. We did that multiple times before. And also set text align to center, because if we save that now and we reload, we see now the text is still blue, but centered in the middle already. Now let's work on that text color then and on the general look and behavior of these links. And for that, I'll target main footer link. So that's the other class we assigned. And here I'll set it to display inline block to make sure that the list items on which this class is added are sitting in the same line. And I'll add a margin of 0 to top and bottom, but I want to have some distance between the list items, which are in the same line due to inline block. So margin left and right could be 16 pixels. If we save that and reload, then we see they're now in the same line with some space in between. Last thing is I want to change the look of the text, and that's the anchor tag as you learned. So now let's use main footer link and then the descendant or direct child combinator to select the anchor tag itself. And there I can set the color to white and the text decoration to none to remove the link. And here's main footer anchor tag hover and main footer anchor tag active. And of course I meant main footer link, though main footer with the descendant operator would have worked too, because there only is one link in the entire footer. So one set of links, I should say, and they should get this style. But this is the more precise and performant way of selecting these. And now we can set some styles for when we hover over these links. Maybe a light gray. CCC gives us such a light gray look. Let's try it out. Let's reload. Yeah, there's a slight change if we hover over them, and that's a nice looking footer in my opinion. And with that, the first version of our starting page is done. Now let's analyze what we did and what we can do as a next step thereafter. So over the last modules, we built this page. It's not finished yet. We can improve the look of that background image, we can center it and so on. We can maybe position that text differently. We can, in general, work with units a bit more, use better units than pixels, we'll do that. We can add images here, and the positioning with inline block has some issues. That hacky approach we used in the navigation bar, where we had to calculate the width of our navigation here by deducting an estimated amount, basically. We can improve that. The fact that here, these boxes on the left and right don't align. These are all things we will fix, especially once we dive into Flexbox, a cool way of layouting elements, you could say, of positioning elements. But the general look is great, and you learned many basics with that, and you practiced many basics now. The next step, still in this same module, will be to add a second page, the Packages page. We'll add the same navigation and footer to the page, and then we'll add some HTML code to that page, and I will show you and explain what it should look like in the end. And then it's your turn to practice that and try to style it with the tools you learned so that you achieve that style I want to see at the end. So these are the next step. Adding that new page, setting the header and the bottom, the footer there, and then adding content to it which you can style. So let's add a new page to our project. We could add it next to the index.html file. We could simply add a new HTML file. But to make sure that our application stays structured and doesn't get confusing, I'll create a subfolder for that page and I'll name it Packages because we will show the different packages of our app. Now in there, I'll create a HTML file and you can name that file whatever you want, but I'll stick to index.html, which is kind of what you, use in web development if you have like a root file, a root HTML file within a folder. So that's my index.html file. And in there, I'll now simply copy the content of the main index.html file on the root folder. So the one we worked in all the time. I copied that because I want to use the same skeleton. I want to also import the same fonts there because we use them there in the index.html file in the packages folder. And of course, we also want to use the same header and footer. So I will just paste that code in here, but of course, get rid of all the content in the main area here. So this should be empty. We just have the header and the footer. We also need to adjust the links now in the header. Here, for example, for packages, we are in the packages folder. So this is just pointing to that index.html file here. For the other folders, though, we need to go up one level with .. and then into the customers folder, or for start hosting, .. start hosting. And we don't have these folders yet. We'll add them later. And for the main page here on our brand, we also need to go up one level with .. and then target this index.html file you find there. So this is the adjusted header. I don't think we need the Anton style in here, by the way. I don't think we'll use it here, so let's get rid of that import on this index.html file in the packages folder. And regarding the CSS file we're importing, well, we should probably split this up over multiple files too, because I don't want to import all the CSS code I use on the starting page into the packages page. And the same is true the other way around, because both pages use different styles and they don't care about the styles the other page uses. There are some shared styles, like the header or the footer, but that's about it. So what we should do is we should create a new CSS file next to the main.css file, which you can call whatever you want, but I will call it shared.css. And into this file, I'll copy my footer code as well as my header and navigation code. I'll cut it out of the main.css file and add it to the shared.css file. And I'll also add this button style there, which we defined. Here, all the button related classes and selectors, because that also probably is shared across pages. So let's also add these declarations to the shared file. So the main.css file is leaner now. We added content to the shared CSS file. We now need to import that shared CSS file into our main root folder index.html file. Otherwise, our header will not look good. I can prove this to you if we save all files and reload. That's not looking good because we extracted the styles into a new file. So let's add a new link here, shared.css, and let's actually move it above the import of the main.css. Why? Because in the shared file, we set up some general styles, general button styles, for example. We always want to have the chance of overwriting them in our more specific page-focused style file, like the main.css file for the root index.html file. And to allow this overwriting to take place, we need to respect the order here, because this is imported and parsed first, this is parsed second. So if we want to overwrite something from the shared file, we need to import the overwriting file second, so that it's parsed later, because later styles overwrite earlier ones, if they have the same selector. So this is the import layout or the import structure in the main index.html file. In the packages folder, we now also import the shared CSS file, and this is actually imported from the root folder, so let's go up there with .. And I will add a new file here, the packages.css file. Here we will really just add the styles for this packages index.html file. Let's add a new link import here, and there I will just point to packages.css. Again, this is added after the shared file, so that we have at least the possibility of overwriting any styles we set up in the shared CSS file. With all that said, if we save that and we reload our starting page, it should look good again, and it does. And the packages link here should actually work now. Now, what we can see here is that the fonts are missing. And the reason for this is that I forgot to extract something in main.css at the very top. This universal selector, as well as the body, that should also go into the shared file, because that, of course, applies to our entire page, to all pages. So let's move that to the top of the shared.css file. And now if we reload this packages subpage, and let me zoom in a bit, now it looks exactly as our starting page when it comes to the header and the footer. And with that, we can start working on that packages page, and we will add some code to it in the next lecture, and then start working on the styling. So attached to this video, you again find an HTML file with some content which you should add to your index.html file in the packages folder. There, in that main area, which currently is empty, just paste the styles in. And what you will see is that we get 3 sections here. These are again our free plans, because we're now on the detail page where we can read more about them. Though technically here is less information, I guess, but we're at least providing a more detailed description here. So if we now reload that packages page, this is what it looks like, and I don't know about you, but beautiful is different, I guess. So the reason why it looks like this is that we enclose all the content in a link, because the entire plan should be clickable in the end. And we will connect this to our to-be-created start hosting folder in the future. Now your goal is to style this page to look like this. This will still not be the final state. We'll then add something together to make sure that the middle plan actually is pushed to the right. Definitely try this on your own. These are all things we learned before. And of course, over the next lectures, we'll solve this together. So good luck with that. Try to add as many of the styles you can see on the preview as possible. So let's start working on that plans page now. Now, the first thing I want to have is I want to have some spacing to my navigation bar. We could add a margin top to that first section, but we can actually just add one to that main element here. And here we can also use the element selector. We could add a class, of course, but we will not have a second main element on this page. So using the main selector is fine. So in the packages.css file, I'll select the main element here, and I will add a padding top to have some spacing between the topmost section and the header of, let's say, 32 pixels. If we now save this and reload, this is pushed down a little bit more, and the links are not blue anymore because I accidentally clicked on one. So this is the first part I wanted to add. Now, the next thing is about the individual packages we have. So a package really is just one of these sections. So if we go to our index.html file in the packages folder, we can add a package class to each section. Of course, you can name that class whatever you want. The idea is that we can assign some general styling. So let's now select package here. And for example, ensure that they don't take the entire width of the page. Let's maybe limit the width to 80%, let's say. Additionally, there should be some spacing between the packages, so I'll add a margin to top and bottom of 16 pixels, but 0 to left and right because I want to position them on the edge of the page. Additionally, maybe some border works nice there too, maybe like 4 pixels, solid and in this dark green, which was 0E4F1F. And if we save that then, this looks like this. Now from the visual perspective, we can probably still improve that. For example, we could get rid of that left border. Now for that, we can target border left and set it to none. The other borders will be kept because we also define these here, but then we override the border left. So with that, if we reload, it looks a little bit nicer. Looks like the plans are coming out of the left edge, which is a look I like a lot. Now, of course, the text looks awful, so we definitely need to work on that too. For this, I'll use my package and select the anchor tag inside of it. And of course, you could also assign a class to that, but here I'll just use the combinator. I'll set the text decoration to none and the color actually to inherit, to use my page default. I'll then set display to block to ensure that the anchor tag takes the full available width of the surrounding section and add a padding of, let's say, 32 pixels. If we now save that, our boxes look like this. So we're getting there. Style is improving. And these still are links, even though they don't look like them anymore. But you see, we still got that hand icon if we hover over that. Now, one thing you can also see is that I can even click that top right corner of that plan, and it's still a link because we set that anchor tag to be a display block element, and hence it takes the full available space inside of that surrounding section. So here you see that's my anchor tag. It really fills the entire section box. So with that, we got the link styled. Now I want to style the content inside of that, of course. So inside of that box. So this is what we'll work on in the next lecture. So with the links styled, let's continue styling our package boxes here. Let's style the title, the subtitle, and the description. And for that, I'll use classes again to not use combinators only. And I'll add a class of package title to the h1 tag. I'll add a class of package subtitle to my h2 tag here, and a class to that paragraph, maybe package info. The names, of course, as always, are up to you. And we should add these classes to all our packages or plans here. So let's do that for all the elements in all the plans. Now with that set up, we got all we need to target the different elements and apply some styling. So back in the packages.css file, let's start with the subtitle. I'll leave the title for now. So subtitle, package subtitle, that class, will receive a color of, let's say, a gray color, maybe a little bit darker than that. Let's go down a little bit. somewhere around that, and I'll turn this to a hex code again, so 979797. If we save that and we reload the page, now we got that dark gray look for the subtitle, which looks good in my opinion. And for the info, let's also target that with package info, so that's the description text. Let's set a padding of, let's say, 16 pixels, and a border of 1 pixel solid and then that dark green, and a font size of 20 pixels maybe, and then a text color of the dark green too. If we save that, it's pushed in a little and it's in that border, so that's nice. So the text is pushed in inside of that border, I should say. One other thing I now want to do is I want to add different backgrounds to the different plans, and each plan should have its own background. And for that, I'll assign IDs to the plans, because if I need to select every plan differently, then IDs are the best way of doing that. So the first plan will get an ID of plus, because it's a plus plan. The second one is the free plan, so this will get an ID of free. And the third one, the third section, will get the ID premium. And of course, you could name this premium plan, free plan, plus plan, whatever you like. With these plan IDs added, we can target the plus plan, for example, and give it a background color of, let's say, a light green, which actually also is slightly transparent. So let's add the RGBA function here to be able to create a slightly transparent color. And the color I prepared for this, but of course you are free to choose a different one, has values 213, 255, and 220, and then 0.95 as a value for the transparency. So this is almost not transparent. 1 would be fully opaque, 0 would be fully transparent. This only has a slight transparency. Now I'll also assign a style for the free plan, and the free plan will get a background color with the RGBA function with a slightly different green. There I prepared 234, 252, 237, and then again 0.95 for the transparency. And the premium plan, that plan will actually receive a color of a darker green, so RGBA again, but here it's 14, 79, 31, and then 0.95. With that, if we now save that, we got that green color, we got these green colors. We see we'll need to adjust the text colors of the last plan because it is dark. It's dark on purpose. We want to kind of emphasize our premium plan. It should look premium. And one other thing I want to do is I want to give these descriptions a white background so that they stand out from the rest. So for that, back in our code on package info, I'll assign a background of white to assign a white color. So now this looks like that. So this is all looking good, but as I said, the premium plan needs to get different text colors. So at the bottom, I'll add my premium selector and then use a combinator, the descendant combinator again. As you see, this is a combinator you use a lot, to select my package title. So we defined that class, haven't used it before, but here we need it, and give this a white color maybe, and also select my package subtitle here, and there I will stick to a gray, but to a different gray, not as dark as the previous one. Here I will use BBB. With that, if we now save this and reload, that's easier to read, and now I like the look of these plans. This is actually what I wanted you to do. One thing's missing though. I want to have a hover effect if we hover over such a plan. So if we go up to our package here, for the entire package, not just for the link, actually both is the same because package A, so the anchor tag, has display block, so it fills the entire package. But the package also includes that border. Therefore, for that package, I want to add a hover effect and an active effect, and add a box shadow. There I'll add 2 pixels, 2 pixels, 2 pixels, or maybe 4 pixels as a blur factor, and no spread. And then I'll add this transparent gray I already used earlier. It's like this. Now finally, I want to add a border color here, and that border color will be FF5454. If we save that and we reload, we see this is looking pretty good. I like that style. So that's looking good. We got our different plans now highlighted, and that is the state I wanted you to reach. Now, chances are you used different colors, or maybe you found a different solution for some of the stylings applied here. Definitely compare your solution to mine and feel free to share yours with your fellow students, discuss them with your fellow students, and let's together now add one more thing, because I want to ensure that this middle plan, the free one, actually is positioned on the right of our page. So this middle plan should be positioned on the right of our page. How can we do this? How can we achieve this? Now with text align right, we can't do it because that's no inline element. If we turn it into one, then we will probably mess up the other styles. Inline block also doesn't look that promising. What we can do is a so-called float. We haven't had a look at floats yet because it's a feature which you don't use that often. You used it a lot in the past to lay out pages, but thankfully these times are over because you introduced a lot of problems with such floats. Now we got better ways like Flexbox, which we'll dive into in this course. But they can be useful. Floating elements can be useful to position some elements differently in your document flow. But what does float mean to begin with? Float means that you override the default positioning and tell the browser to push an element to the left or the right of the page. Now, the left is actually already the case, but with float you can also, and that will automatically happen, take it out of the document flow. This is also why we're not using floats that often, because you rarely want this. Let me show you how it works. If I add a float to my free plans, if I go down to my free selector here, we add it by adding the float property and then adding right as a value to float this to the right. If I now reload, you see it's moved to the right and the bottom element takes its place. Now I said that it's taken out of the document flow. As you can see, this is not entirely correct. The text now floats around this element. And that's the idea behind float. It's great for positioning an image in text and make sure that the text actually flows around the image. It's not as great for positioning block level elements as we do, because the text will respond to it, the other block level elements won't, so to say. So that's why we end up with this layout. What we have to do is we have to basically keep its space reserved and tell the other block level elements that come after it that they shouldn't respect any previous floatings. And we do this with a little hack, and that's why you don't really use floats for positioning anymore. It's ugly. You add an additional helper div after the element you floated, so after the free plan section here, a div which you simply give a class with any name of your choice. I'll name it clearFix because I will fix the floating with something which is called clear. And then you define that class. I'll define it before I add my hashtags, my ID selectors, clearFix. And in there, you have one property, clear both, which means clear floats on both sides, left and right, which are the two values you can assign here. This means any elements coming after this element or an element with that class will not respect previous floats. So with that, if we save that and reload, you see we're back to the old layout and every element stays in position. Now this is a hacky way of doing that. We got better ways nowadays. We can use different things like Flexbox, which make positioning so much easier and cleaner, and we will dive into that, as I said. But be aware that float is available, that it's great for positioning something like images in text, where you want the content to float around or to flow around. But if you want to use it for positioning elements on your page layout, try to avoid it. If you do it, be aware of the clear fix, which actually clears the float to keep the other elements in their place. Now with that, we added the float. Now one thing I also want to do is, the styling here is wrong. The border should now be removed on the right, not on the left. So what I'll actually do is, here on the free selector, I'll add border right and set this to none, and instead add border left and set this to the same settings I used up there for package in general, 4 pixel, solid, and that dark green color. That is what I want to add here as my border left. Finally, I also want to move the text to the right with text align right. If we save that and we now reload, the entire plan is pushed to the right. One thing you can see though, the left border does not turn red if we hover over this element. Now, do you know why? That is really tricky, and you score bonus points if you know why that's happening. We'll fix it, or we'll talk about it in the next lecture. So do you know why this left border stays green when we hover over the plan, whilst the other 2 borders become red? It has to do with specificity. Let's inspect this free plan element, the whole section, and let's add the hover effect in the developer tools. Now, this is the styling which gets applied when we hover over this element. We can see the reason for the green border on the left here already. Border left with that green color is the topmost rule, so it has a higher specificity than any rule below it, like our hover rule. So the general red border color is overwritten by this more specific rule. And why does this rule have a higher specificity? Because we use an ID selector. And as you learned, ID selectors have a higher specificity than class selectors or pseudo selectors. So that's the reason for the behavior we're seeing here. Now, how can we fix this? A clean fix with some redundant code, kind of, is of course to go down to our free ID selector and also add the hover as well as active pseudo selectors there and set the border left color to that red color here too. If we do that and we reload the page, now we get the same look as before. Now this is, as I said, a clean way of fixing this. An alternative, which you should absolutely use in very, very rare occasions only, is that you go up to your hover style and you add exclamation mark important after this style. Now what does important do? Important overrides specificity. Now this declaration always wins. If you got it a second time with important, then the specificity is taken into account again. But if you only add it one time, this always wins. So if we save this, and please keep in mind I commented out the cleaner solution, and we reload the page, we still got the border here on the left, because if we inspect the section and inspect the hover state, we see theoretically free here has the highest specificity, but border color actually is now applied because of important. Using important is a bad practice. I will say it just like that, because if you use important all over your code becomes unreadable and you're breaking the concept of specificity, which exists for a good reason. So use it in very rare cases, maybe in cases like this one, but better in cases where you use some third-party library, which might not be written in a good way and therefore overrides some defaults, maybe sets a default button style which you don't want to have all the time. Then you could override such library defaults with important, but in the end, be careful about this. Don't use it too often. I will comment it out here and I will comment in the cleaner solution. I wanted to highlight that this is an alternative, and in this case you could use it, but it's still discourage using it. So with that, let's reload one final time, and we got the result we want almost. I should not comment this out entirely, should just comment out the important version of it, not the border color in general. So now let's reload. And now we got the final style we want. So this is the packages page finished. It has all the styles I wanted to add to it. Now with that, let's revisit our page as we built it thus far. Let's see if we can improve something, and let's then conclude this module. I like the look of our page. One thing I noticed though is here, the plans, we could center them because they're not centered right now. If we go back to our main index.html file in the root folder, here we got our section with the ID plans. And there we got the div with all our plans inside of it. Now we could give that div a class, plans, or plan list to stay in line with the other code we wrote in this module thus far. And then in the main.css file, maybe above plan here for plan list with a class selector though, we can set something like with 80% margin auto to also center this horizontally. Now with margin auto added, if we go back and refresh the page, here we see that this is centered, that these three boxes are centered. Now if we change the page size, you see it doesn't look that great if we go to a very small device width, but we'll take care about this later in the course when we implement a responsive design. But at least it doesn't go as broad on a big device, and we have this block of 3 elements centered. Now, one thing you might notice though is that whilst the block of the 3 elements actually is centered, we can confirm this by inspecting it in the dev tools. There you can see that indeed this div does have an equal margin, this orange part on the left and right. But even though that's the case, the blocks themselves inside of that div are not centered. So in that blue area here, you see there's more white space on the right than on the left. And you can also tell by the section title, which is not centered above that highlighted box. This happens because inside of our div with the plan list class, we have 3 inline block elements sitting next to each other. The overall block is centered on the page, but inside this block, the 3 elements are not. Now we can do this by simply adding text align center here to plan list. If we do that and then reload, now we see that the 3 elements are indeed now also centered within their div, and therefore this section title perfectly aligns with that middle highlighted box. And that's it. Now in the next course module, Manuel will take over and will introduce you to positioning. Something which actually offers you quite a bit of possibilities and which allows you to control how your elements are actually positioned in detail on your page.